Do you think you belong here with a bag?" The officer's words cut through the warm afternoon air like a cold blade. William Carter, a dignified man in his late 60s, paused as he reached for the door handle of the small boutique. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sudden sting of unwarranted accusation. It had started as an ordinary day. William had decided to treat himself after weeks of caring for his ailing brother. The sun bathed the bustling streets of Chicago, casting a golden glow over the city he had called home his entire life. Dressed in his Sunday best, a modest suit and his favorite hat, he carried with him a handbag, vintage leather, worn but well kept. It wasn't just any bag. It had belonged to his father, a cherished family heirloom passed down through generations. "Excuse me." William turned to face the young officer, his eyes meeting his, with a mixture of confusion and quiet strength. "Is there a problem, officer?" "That bag," the officer repeated, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Looks expensive. Where'd you get it?" William felt the eyes of passers-by settling on them, whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd. He stood a little straighter, his voice steady. "It was my father's. I've had it for many years." The officer scoffed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Sure it was. Mind if I take a look inside?" William's heart quickened, but he refused to let it show. "I do mind, actually. Unless I've done something wrong, I believe I have the right to go about my business." The officer stepped closer, his hand hovering near his belt. "That's not how this works, sir. Hand over the bag." A mixture of disbelief and indignation surged within William. "I'm not giving you my bag. Now, if you'll excuse me." Before he could finish, the officer snatched the handbag from his grasp. Gasps echoed around them as onlookers watched the scene unfold. William reached out instinctively, but the officer held it out of reach, rifling through its contents without care. "Stop this at once," William demanded, his voice firm. The officer ignored him, pulling out his wallet, his handkerchief, personal items that were no one's business but his own. "Just making sure there's nothing you're not supposed to have," he said with a cold grin. Tears of frustration pricked at William's eyes, but he blinked them away. "This is harassment. I will be reporting you." The officer laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Go ahead, but until then, I'll be holding on to this." He tucked the bag under his arm, turning away as if the matter was settled. At that moment, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Marcus Carter, William's son, sharply dressed in a tailored suit. As an attorney with the Department of Justice, he had a commanding presence that matched his commitment to upholding the law. His eyes quickly took in the scene, his father standing proud yet shaken, the officer attempting to walk away with his belongings. "What's going on here?" Marcus's voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. The officer turned, momentarily startled. "Just conducting an investigation," he replied curtly. Marcus approached, his gaze steady. "By confiscating personal property without cause." "Stay out of this," the officer snapped. "It's police business." "Actually," Marcus said, pulling out his identification, "it's my business now. I'm with the Department of Justice." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the officer's face, but he quickly masked it with bravado. He was acting suspiciously, just doing my job. Marcus looked at his father, who met his gaze with a silent exchange of strength and reassurance. He then turned back to the officer. "Return his bag, immediately." The officer hesitated, his grip tightening on the handbag. "I need to verify that it's not stolen property." Marcus stepped closer. "You have no probable cause. You're violating his rights. I suggest you hand it over now." Reluctantly, the officer thrust the bag back toward William. "Fine. Take it, but I'll be keeping an eye on you." "That won't be necessary," Marcus replied coolly. "We'll be filing a formal complaint." The officer muttered something under his breath as he retreated, the crowd parting to let him pass. The tension began to dissipate, replaced by a murmur of conversations and the hum of city life resuming. William exhaled slowly, his composure returning. "Thank you, Marcus." Marcus smiled gently. "Always, Dad. Are you okay?" William nodded, clutching the handbag close. "I'm fine. Just tired of this happening over and over." Marcus's expression hardened. It shouldn't have happened at all. That officer crossed a line. William looked into his son's eyes, seeing the fire that had driven him to pursue justice as a career. "What will you do?" "I'm going to make sure he's held accountable," Marcus said firmly. Not just for you, but for anyone else he's mistreated. Over the next few days, Marcus delved into the officer's background. His name was Officer Brian Miller, a man with a history of complaints that had been quietly dismissed or ignored. Patterns of harassment, especially toward the elderly and minorities, emerged from the shadows of bureaucratic neglect. Marcus enlisted the help of his colleague, Rachel Simmons, a sharp and dedicated investigator. Together, they gathered testimonies, unearthed buried reports, and built a case that could not be easily dismissed. "He's been getting away with this for years," Rachel remarked one evening as they pored over documents. "How has no one stopped him?" "Complacency, lack of oversight, maybe even complicity," Marcus replied grimly. "But not anymore." Meanwhile, William found himself reflecting on the incident. The violation he felt was not just personal, but communal, a shared experience among those who had been marginalized and disrespected. He decided to attend a local community meeting where he shared his story. Others came forward, voices trembling with memories of their own encounters with Officer Miller. One man, George Adams, recounted how the officer had intimidated his teenage grandson without cause. A shopkeeper spoke of unwarranted inspections that bordered on harassment. The collective stories painted a damning picture. Empowered by solidarity, William and the community members agreed to support Marcus's efforts. They provided statements, signed petitions, and rallied for justice. As the case gained traction, media attention followed, and the spotlight turned toward Officer Miller and the department that had shielded him. Pressured by public outcry, Internal Affairs initiated a formal investigation. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Officer Miller's demeanor shifted from defiance to desperation. He attempted to discredit the claims, but his words rang hollow against the chorus of voices demanding accountability. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from Rachel. "They've scheduled a hearing," she informed him. "Miller will face disciplinary action." "That's a step in the right direction," Marcus said, though he knew the road ahead was still long. On the day of the hearing, William stood beside his son outside the courthouse. Reporters gathered, microphones poised, but he remained focused. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked him gently. William met his gaze, his eyes reflecting years of resilience. "I've been ready for this my whole life." Inside, the proceedings unfolded with meticulous detail. Testimonies were heard, evidence presented. William spoke with grace and conviction, his words weaving together personal experience and a call for systemic change. Officer Miller sat across the room, his expression unreadable. When it was his turn to speak, he offered half-hearted apologies and excuses, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The board deliberated briefly before announcing the decision. Officer Miller was to be dismissed from the force, his actions deemed unbecoming and in violation of the department's ethical standards. A ripple of relief and quiet celebration moved through those gathered. Justice, in this instance, had prevailed. As William and Marcus exited the courthouse, they were met with applause from supporters. A reporter approached, asking, "Mr. Carter, how do you feel about the outcome?" William paused, considering his words. "I feel hopeful," he said. "Not just for myself, but for everyone who believes in dignity and respect." Marcus placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "It's a victory," he added, "but there's still work to be done." In the weeks that followed, the community continued to organize, advocating for better training and oversight within the police department. William's experience became a catalyst for broader discussions on justice and equality. One evening, as the sun set over the Chicago skyline, William and Marcus sat on the porch of William's home, the air filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. "You know," William mused, "I never imagined I'd be at the center of something like this." Marcus smiled. "You inspired a lot of people, Dad, including me." William chuckled softly. "You've always been my inspiration. Your dedication, your passion for justice. Your mother would be proud." Marcus looked out at the fading light. "We made a difference, but we have to keep pushing." "Yes," William agreed, "for the next generation." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past weeks lifting. The handbag rested on William's lap, a symbol not just of his family's legacy, but of the strength that comes from standing together against injustice. "Do you think things will really change?" William asked quietly. Marcus considered the question. "Change is slow, but every step matters." What we did, it matters. William nodded, a gentle smile touching his lips. Then we'll keep taking steps. As night settled in, father and son remained side by side, united in purpose and hope. The challenges ahead were many, but together they were ready to face them.